things. My problem is with Wall Street, not with Silicon Valley. There's a libertarian streak that runs through Silicon Valley that frightens me. I mean, it's just fundamentally selfish.
We're a startup, we have no credit. We were just 6-7 guys sitting until 1 a.m. every day on our laptops shipping books.
Oh, I think there's a lot of things to do to, I think, open the perspective of the Japanese animation industry, and also just to work women.
It has pulled forward 5 years of digital transformation in 5 months. You know, it's not the S&P 500, it's the S&P 5.
When you're struggling those early days, you could also do anything. And that was the beauty too. We could try things.
An intelligence, in this case, an algorithm, ingests and learns from and evolves. And I just found it so fascinating because that literally could be the meaning of life right there.
And that is a wrap. Perfect. And 3, 2, 1. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Masters of the Universe. And today I have a very unique guest who specializes in a very cool company called Voices. And his name is David Ciccarelli. I was figuring out how to pronounce his name and he helped me pronounce it by suggesting you say S instead of the C. So it makes it very clear. Welcome, David. How's it going?
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and so as I was mentioning, David is a founder, CEO of a company called Voices.com. It is, I believe, the world's largest voice recording and voiceover company. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We view it as a marketplace. And so we're connecting buyers that could be at an ad agency or a marketing department with a professional voice talent. So that's why I try to up my game on a podcast like this, make sure I've got a good recording and that hopefully my voice is coming through nicely, nice and clear.
Yeah, no, totally. Usually I was mentioning to David, usually I have a good setup too, but this time I just got lazy. So my apologies. His voice is going to be amazing always, right? There you go. So our topic, we're going to be talking about David's journey, his personal, life and how he evolved into an entrepreneur. But I thought interesting themes that would come up would also be around the gig economy and just something what you're doing is so unique. Obviously, I come from an enterprise SaaS background, so anything that's consumer is always exciting to me. So I'm super excited and I'm super grateful that you could join us. So with that, I'll jump right in. And David, just tell us your story, man. Where does it begin?
Well, I'd love to. You always try to figure out where's the appropriate starting point. But I think every entrepreneur probably that you spoke with, there was a glimmer in their eye or an idea that maybe they had for their business, but probably even before then, there was a thread, if you will, that kind of weaved through their life. And for me, it was always around music and sound. I grew up tinkering with mom and dad's record player, and we had this old shortwave radio. So I love, sound. My dad actually got the first, at the time it was a Commodore 64. So I'm going back a while ago.
Oh, wow.
That I had ever seen anywhere before we even had them in the school. So I also love the tech side of it. And I, played in bands, I played drums and piano lessons. So kind of this, this Venn diagram of art and tech and music is really what I wanted to pursue after graduating from high school. So I found a program. It was at a school called the Ontario Institute of Audio Recording Technology. It's there where I learned how to record and edit and mix and produce music and sound for film, sound for TV, live sound, and of course recording in a studio. And so my desire was to actually someday open up my own studio, and that's what I went to school to learn how to do. And it was actually through that experience that some of the industry lectures that were happening were from other studio owners, and they said that you needed a business plan and you should kind of outline, here's the equipment you need, here's what the business should look like. And so I actually drafted up a business plan, just typed it up as best as I knew how. And after graduating, I opened up a small recording studio of my own. And so that's kind of how it began. And that would be, something that maybe for those watching and listening is think about, your experiences of life to date. Are there areas of passion that you can then, parlay or transform into a business? Because it's always going to have a lot more longevity than something that you just think is kind of a
Right.
cool idea, or maybe you might be able to make a quick buck. Running a business is a marathon, not a sprint.
I could not say it better. And I think you touched upon an interesting point. You said focus on the passion. And I've seen sort of two sides of it, right? Is passion something that comes from trying new things, and it's or is it something that you have and you want to jump in? Like, how do you unpack that? It's a loaded question, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have my wife and I, we have 4 kids, and in speaking with other parents of young kids, they're often challenged with, do you put your kid into one activity, like I want them to play hockey or I want them to play baseball, and kind of, force it upon them, or do you take the approach of, hey, I'm going to expose them to a lot of different ideas, different areas, and see kind of where they get it, where do they have a knack for, right? And so that's what we've tried to do with our kids. I think my parents were very influential in that same way, to give me opportunity to try different things, and then ultimately land on kind of some, a pursuit that coalesced the best of all of those. So I think your passion, it's going to evolve over time. Some activities you pursue for, and are engaged in a short period of time. Other ones you find, I actually still really like, I still like hiking or mountain biking, or I really still like, playing drums or piano every now and then. So those passions are probably going to be there. If the one question you could ask yourself is, if I wasn't paid to do the job, and would I still do it? Because I just enjoy it that much.
No, I agree with that, because when you're starting anything out, it's never about the money. Trust me, like it's the amount of struggle you will have to deal with. No money could ever, compensate for that. It really comes down to the passion. So you started a recording studio. What does that world look like? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, the recording studio is a small project studio, with a laptop, some equipment. I had a collection of microphones, a soundproof space as much as I could, and some great recording software. And so nowadays, a lot of this software comes like, part of the Adobe Creative Cloud, or GarageBand pre-installed on every Mac that's out there. But back in the day, I mean, you had to pay, and going back, more than 10 years, you had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for a setup like that, probably about $20,000. So that was, I did that actually for about a year and a bit. And I actually got my name in the local newspaper on my birthday. And it was introducing this, small studio to the local business community. And I was in the Business London, the Business Monday, in the London, Canada's city newspaper. And who, read that article, but who's now my dear wife, Stephanie, her mom actually saw that article and gave it to her, because Stephanie's actually a classically trained singer. She'd sing at not only was going to Western University for music education, but she'd sing at weddings and funerals and other special events. So she was kind of a gig performer of her own. And so she came into the studio to record her singing repertoire. And that's how we met. But it's interesting because that same article, there was actually some other small businesses in town that wanted a female voice to record their radio commercials and their phone system greetings.
Interesting.
And I only knew Stephanie, so I gave her a call. I said, do you think you can come down to the studio? I'll be the engineer and you be the voice talent. And we were in business together. I think we split the money and just kind of hadn't looked back ever since. So that's how we kind of moved from me recording, garage bands and rock and roll and hip hop artists and electronic musicians to more of the commercial side of the recording business, which are phone systems and radio and TV commercials, web videos. I mean, and nowadays, anytime the human voice is there to tell a story, right? And present that brand message and hopefully mobilize that audience to take some kind of action. So that's how we move from, me running a studio to us really reinventing this, kind of redesigning and building a website for the first time, frankly, that said, Stephanie's the one voice talent. And it didn't take long before other freelancers would, and independent voice talent or voice artists, we kind of use those terms interchangeably, they would find the site either through a search or a referral, and they would say, hey, I speak French or I speak Spanish, I do character voices, can I be on your website? And that was the real genesis of us, I guess, the first pivot, as we call it in startup world, of going from a studio into an online platform where we said, yeah, it wasn't long before we got a few, I think it was about 100 people that were listed as available talent. And concurrently, people would find clients, at ad agencies and small video production shops and boutiques would say, how do I get in touch with that person? And that was the proverbial aha moment of like, wow, we should be the connector, the facilitator of connecting that voice buying client with the voice selling talent. And so we did that pivot out of the studio business, sold all of our the equipment that we had, and really hacked together our own first version of the website that we started facilitating those connections.
Wow. One thing that I've seen a consistent pattern on is some of the best companies or startups often start out as a personal problem, right? So, and this is a great example of that. So really, voices.com started off, the origin story is basically a website that you created to solve your own problem, right?
Exactly.
And it just turned out that, other people had a similar problem and they started outreaching to your team. And so at what point did you realize there was something here? And because a pivot is never an easy thing. You did a fairly dramatic step. You closed down the studio. Like, at what point did you realize that this was the moment that you had to go from, a studio, sort of a more hands-on, face-to-face approach to completely digital and online?
Yeah, it was actually pretty dramatic turning point. We recognized, and it was actually that we had kids. Be perfectly straightforward, and the reason I bring that up is because it's actually, hard to have a recording studio in the front half of your apartment and a newborn in the back half of your apartment. So right away we realized that was it was going to pose a continued challenge, a newborn crying in the background, if you will. But also there was, I would say, a critical mass, and I use that term very lightly in the sense that there was enough voice talent who had expressed interest to participate on the website that we thought, hey, we're delivering value. We're sending them gigs, right? We're sending them job opportunities. They're making money. What if we charge them a small annual membership fee to be part of the website? And let's really try to invest in bringing on more clients who would hire them. And so for that, we actually decided to write, and Stephanie wrote this long form sales email that more or less said, we are going to market you. We're going to create this kind of full profile instead of just a little name and a link to an audio player where you could listen. We'll create a full profile for you. We're going to reinvent as an actual marketplace. And from just kind of a static directory, it'll be more like a two-sided marketplace. And in exchange for a small annual membership fee, which I believe we started as $49 for the year, and then I think once we got up to we got it up to $100 for the year. And in exchange for this annual membership fee, we will do our best to market the platform and help get you work. And over that first weekend, we emailed everybody that we could find at the time. It was kind of two ways you would navigate. You'd either search or you would navigate your way through the Yahoo directory. So Stephanie
Right.
emailed everybody through the Yahoo
Wow.
directory and sent them kind of a one-to-one personalized email and invited them. And we made over $5,000 in subscriptions over that first weekend. So right away, we knew that we were onto something. Then it became the challenge of, okay, people have, they know it's new. They've entrusted us with, really with their money and with their brand that they wanted to be affiliated with us. So now is up to me to really hustle and reach out to as many video production companies and small ad agencies as I could to tell them that we had this online marketplace where they could find voice talent.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest challenges with marketplaces is the supply and demand, right? The chicken and the egg. And you have to kind of simultaneously put both of them together. It seems like from your experience, at least it was initial demand was there. People were willing to actually pay, which is, by the way, the great sign that there's some product market fit here.
Mm-hmm.
So they were willing to actually pay you, and you guys made $5,000 in the first weekend, which is amazing. How did you solve the supply side? Like, how did you solve the production side and so on?
Mm-hmm.
Folks who wanted that talent. So sorry, the demand side.
Yeah, it is the demand. Yeah, that's right. So there's, I think you're touching on something really important because a lot, there's a whole platform revolution going on. I mean, there's lots of books on this right now. I literally I got three in the mail this week. I continue to read all about them. And that is the first challenge. And let's just kind of define, if we will, a platform is where you're connecting. It's either an innovation platform where there's a whole ecosystem, for instance, iOS or Android or the Windows operating system. That's kind of an innovation ecosystem.
Right.
Or a transactional platform, which are often these two-sided marketplaces. Now, how do you build it up? Well, you got to pick who's going to be on which side. Who are the sellers? Who are the buyers? Or in other words, who's the sellers, or who is that? They're the supply, who's available, and who are the buyers? Who's going to be driving that demand to get the thing going? Now, I love that you touched on the chicken and the egg approach, because sometimes it's easy to look afar and go like, oh, it's pretty simple to pull off, but that's probably the hardest thing. Once you even figure out who's going to be on each side, then the next question is, how do you actually build it up? And there's two philosophies. Number one, you can pick one side and build that critical mass up, which is what I kind of alluded to. We had 100 voice talent that we felt like we could fulfill most requests that were coming in. But I mean, 100, is pretty small, but the way we did it over time, and why I say we didn't need 10,000. Sometimes there's this belief you need like 100,000 or 1 million people on your supply side before you even talk. You actually probably need a lot less people than you think, especially if it's purely online. But once you get enough, let's call it 100 or 1,000 who are going to be your suppliers, then it's this zigzag approach of you get, more supply, more demand. Then you got to invest to get more supply and more demand. And that is how we built it up. I think all the way to about the first couple 100,000 users, it was pretty much a 50-50 split. As of late, there's a lot more freelance voice talent that are interested in pursuing. There's a lot of freelancer websites and gig sites and blogs that, we get mentioned in, which we're super grateful for, but it does attract a lot more aspiring voice talent who want to participate. But yeah, it's a harder business than it looks at the outset.
No, totally. As a enterprise, entrepreneur, like I have huge respects for market. At least on our end, it's complex sales, but there's very focused buyers and they have workflow issues. So the problems are pretty evident. It's really about the execution scale side. I find that in marketplaces, it's figuring out the chicken and egg. That's one. But then figuring out how to scale it proportionally, right? Do you raise a lot of money and get the demand first and then focus on supply? Like, how do you manage that? And then how do you continue to scale that? Because, every time you hit a limit, you got to focus on the next one and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And did you raise any institutional money or investor money, or is it all bootstrap?
We did. I'd love to tell
Okay.
you the
Yeah, I want to hear the
story
story.
actually. So I'll give you the punchline first. We ended up, total like lifetime to date, it's over $25 million that we've raised. The Series A was $18 million US. But how we got there was it was definitely not in even the first decade, to be honest with you. We bootstrapped, and there's three ways that any company is going to finance, any startup's going to finance their dream or their vision. The first one is cash from customers, which is precisely like, if you can build something and sell it and it delivers value, I mean, that is the absolute most efficient way to grow a company. The challenge becomes you can only grow so fast, and you might want to pursue a bigger opportunity. Maybe acquire a competitor, or maybe it's actually you found a new marketing channel that's that you're getting $3 back for every dollar you spend. So that LTV to CAC, as we call that, you want to lean into that. So cash from customers, to the point you take that as far as you can. And then you're probably going to want to work with some debt financing. If you can get the debt, it's going to be cheaper, and there's a lot more favorable terms. You still retain 100% of the ownership. So we actually took on, we got our first loan was for $30,000, and then $50,000. And then we got a $100,000 loan and paid off the earlier ones. And then it was $250, $500, $900, and the Business Development Bank of Canada provided us with a $2 million credit facility, so a loan that was repayable, of course. And after that, we are an asset light business. We don't have a fleet of cars. Most software companies are like that. What do we have around us? Computers, desks, and chairs, which are all depreciating very quickly.
Yeah.
So, a bank to finance, and that, we don't need, as they say, building a factory or some drilling holes into the earth, mining for something. So what are they really investing in? It's probably the intellectual property. And there's very few banks and financial institutions that understand the mechanics of SaaS businesses, because you have, not to get all financy here, but you have deferred revenue issues there's just a lot of challenges that aren't the classic way that banks go about financing an asset or an asset purchase. So in that way, I realized, I think we have probably reached the end of our road with the 2 million. And Stephanie and I wanted to make a bold move, which was actually that third financing option, which is equity. So now we're talking about selling a portion of your company in exchange for cash, a cash infusion into your company. And so we, over the years, had actually had a number of investors who had expressed interest in Voices, either at events or on an awards list of some kind,
Right.
Some conference we were maybe at. And I actually kept them all in a list, a big spreadsheet that I figured when that day comes, I want to be able to have kind of I don't want to be doing the research. I just want to, call the day, the start gun goes off and we're off to the races. So I reached out to, the list was about 200 investors. I reached out to them with a simple email. It said, Voices is raising a Series A of about $15 million. If you're interested, just reply, let me know, and I'll send you a one-pager. And so a one-pager is a really good tip for those aspiring entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs that are trying to figure out, how do I raise capital? The one-pager, says the problem you're trying to, your elevator pitch, the problem that you're trying to solve, the solution, and any results. That's kind of the formula. And that one-pager I sent out, half the people said yes, yep, send me your one-pager. And when I sent it, I said, if you like what you see, why don't we get on a phone call and I'll walk you through the business, and I did probably about 80 of those phone calls. And those led to, at the end of that, you hear kind of about their firm, what size of business, what industries they like, and then you tell your story. And so those led down to about 20 in-person meetings. And, I would say Stephanie and I we did a roadshow. And so we went from Toronto to Boston, New York, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. And throughout that experience, I mean, we got pretty good at giving the pitch and the demo, and it was the same deck. So we were running what's called a process. We were very much in control. We had a deadline and an amount that we wanted to raise, a deadline at which we wanted to do it by. And that, I think, is also another key takeaway of, if you're going to raise capital, you need to be in control. You need to stay firm with your milestones of really moving the deal forward. Because candidly, otherwise, the investor always wants to learn more information about you. Oh, just another month, another quarter. Let's get some more data.
Yeah.
Data. I have a sense you've probably been there and know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's best that you are really driving the agenda. In the end, we actually ended up with 3 term sheets, and the one kind of thought on those term sheets is, think about not just the valuation and the financial aspects of it, but also the control. How much are you giving up, from the piece of the company, to some of the more of those finer points, like voting rights, or needing to get permission from the makeup of the board of directors, or needing to get permission from your board of directors to make certain decisions. Hiring or firing an executive would be an example of that. So
liquidation preferences, there's a whole range of stuff.
Absolutely. So you want to get your references from other founders, people that you know. There's a lot of really great investors. So ours is actually Morgan Stanley Expansion Capital. They're a global investment bank. They have a private equity or growth equity group that is based in San Francisco, and we work with them. They've been fantastic to us, and I've learned a lot from their tutelage, so to speak, and hopefully have grown as an executive through that throughout the process.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. And as you were talking about this, I was just like reminded of that process, right? The dreaded process. And I completely agree. It's sort of like sales, right? It's a conversion game, but leverage matters. So, as you mentioned, as an entrepreneur, you should run the process. The process should not run you, because otherwise you'll just keep dragging on and on. And I know you mentioned a few things around how to structure, let's say, term sheets, how to make sure that you're in an advantageous position, and so on. So maybe let's do a deeper dive on this. Like, what do you think, when, let's say, a founder or an entrepreneur is negotiating with a venture capitalist or a PE firm, what do you think as a founder is very important that they should always consider? Like, these things are essential to fight for, and versus maybe some of the things that may not be as essential, but it seems like they are.
For sure. Well, I've had the good fortune of participating at an executive program at Harvard Business School. So I'm going to share the Negotiating 101 class that we did very briefly. There's 2 concepts that maybe many of you watching and listening might know. But the first one is going to be the zone of possible agreement. It's called the ZOPA. So basically what that means is you need to go into any deal knowing roughly what you think. So in terms of startups, what you think your startup is worth and how much you're willing to give away for how much you're willing, like how much you want to raise, right? So if you think your startup's worth, $5 million and you're willing to give away half of it, okay. So you're going to raise $2.5 million. Now, kind of the parameters, and anything with, that's there or above, like you're in that zone of, it's a possible agreement. Maybe there's some other things that might be factors or considerations, but knowing that before you walk into a room, that's super helpful. Another concept is actually anchoring, which is if you can get the other party to present their perspective first, there's pros and cons to who kind of says what they think the valuation is first, or really what you want. by its very nature, the fact that you are saying, hey, I'm raising $5 million or $2 million, you're actually anchoring the conversation because everything's going to swirl around that. And valuation, are you really worth that much? What percentage am I getting for 5 million? So think through the pros and cons of anchoring and what that means. And then finally, when it comes to these, the term sheet or even trying to get those term sheets, know what's called your BATNA, which stands for best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If you can get multiple term sheets, you're not force-fed into picking one term sheet over another because you have another alternative. If I don't like your terms, my best alternative is the next guy or gal's term sheet. And if I don't like their term sheet, maybe I've got another one on deck. And so for us, that's why you want to run the process, as we say, and get a couple of those term sheets in by a particular deadline, because then you have alternatives. You're picking between a number of them, and that I guess kind of worst case BATNA or best alternative is always a walk away. You should know what your walk away is of like, this just isn't happening. The investor wants 95% of my company and royalties on going after that or something. Like you should know when it's just not happening. You can, maybe the dynamics in the industry changed. Maybe you lost a key executive throughout the process. So that's going to be kind of a hard story to explain. And so it's always okay to walk away. Not ideal, but you should know under what conditions you would. So you're not in the heat of the moment feeling pressured to take a deal or pursue a deal that you normally otherwise wouldn't. So remember anchoring, BATNA, and ZOPA.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I thought that was, it was a great refresher for sure. And going along with that, another thing I've noticed is, entrepreneurs raising way too much money for a much higher valuation. And it seems to be this current race of like, hey, how much can you raise and how high of a valuation? And often they don't realize that if every time you set a certain valuation for VCs, they're looking for a 7 to 10x outcome, right? PE is maybe less so, but it is a multiple, right? So the higher the valuation, the greater the expectation, right? And the greater the risk for founders to be able to operate and figure things out. How has your experience been? Like, what is your advice for folks thinking about valuations?
I would try to build as much value before even taking a VC term sheet in the first place. Hence why we bootstrapped for a really long time. Like, as I said, about 10 years.
Wow.
And
by the way, respect to that. There's too often these days, too many entrepreneurs are just raising before anything. So yeah,
for sure. And, it definitely, like most things in life, I mean, to each their own. It has its own pros and cons. We just tried to take a long view. We wanted to retain as much ownership as possible. And so that, to that end, we actually, and I just share this for the lesson to be learned, that we actually had the opportunity to raise more money at the Series A than we thought. But what was important to us was to have let's even call it a super majority ownership still. That was very, very important. We didn't want to be on the cusp. We didn't want to take out, this monster secondary. For those is like kind of money when they say the founders take some money off the table, right? You're getting rewarded for how far you've taken it so far, but do you really need a big chunk of money right when you're starting your company or you're about to pursue the next leg of the journey? That's what that, primary goes into call it the treasury of the organization, and then secondary would go to founders. So we actually tried to minimize both of those things because what was most important to us was ownership. Wow. And actually the valuation I thought was fair and generous, but not absurd. Because where it really is going to be challenging for founders is at Series B, or if you can get to Series C, because you're at an eventual sale or exit, what a lot of founders may not realize is this notion of around a liquidation preference. This means that the investors get their money back first and you get whatever's left over. And so that, if they've raised and they're trying, if you've raised and you're at this really high valuation and they're trying to shoot for that and they keep putting more money in, they're going to pull their 10 or 15 or however much, 100 that you've raised first. And there's unfortunately a lot of stories of entrepreneurs that work very hard for a long period of time and just don't have a whole lot to show for it at the end. They might have had the optics are at really a big exit. But if there's anything I've kind of heard just, from other entrepreneurs I spoke to, there's always a sense of like, I sold too early, or and I also like took money too early at too big of a valuation. Those are two of the things that I hear. So I've let that serve as a bit of a guiding principle for me of like, how do we build value ourselves as kind of capital efficient as possible before, pursuing the dilution that comes by, every institutional investor that's kind of taking another chunk from you. There is a time to do the capital when it's like very clear line of sight, but not the just because I can get an extra 5 million of capital infused. If you don't need it, don't take it, I guess would be the takeaway.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story. I was having dinner with another entrepreneur, CEO. So he was a founder, CEO, and he actually sold his company for 800 million, which is pretty substantial. However, his outcome, and without saying numbers or saying any names, I mean, when he told me, I was like, really, you're kidding, right? So it goes back to your point. I mean, it was great, but for the exit and the multiple and the amount of effort put in, it was not, you would not expect that. So It happens. Absolutely. Yeah. And David, like, let's move back to, voices and then marketplaces. Sure. This is big trend these days around, the gig economy, right? So it seems like we're creating marketplaces, I would say almost like for the past 10 years, like marketplaces have been this big sort of a shift of how society operates, right? You have Uber Eats, we have Fiverr, where you can pay anyone $5 and so on to do interesting things. You have, home cleaning services, food delivery services, and so on. What are your thoughts on this evolution of the gig economy and how it's transforming just human beings and society in general?
Well, I think particularly in the last, let's call it 6 months, right? Since the onset of COVID-19, it has pulled forward 5 years of digital transformation in 5 months.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is why you see every e-commerce, it's not the S&P 500, it's the S&P 5. I mean, there's 5 big tech companies that are super overweighted in that index that are driving the whole stock market forward. It's tech that is leading it because now there is a global phenomenon, a pandemic where people were in lockdown and as such did not have the luxury of going out and carrying on life as they once did. And so all of us, myself included, and likely you as well, were prompted to look for an online alternative. Consider doing things that you never would have considered before. Classic example is grocery delivery, or even curbside pickup. That was never something that, our household would be pre-ordering groceries and just having them basically placed into the car at a particular date and time. So now the question becomes, are these shifts temporary or are they permanent? And, if it takes only 21 days to establish a routine, I couldn't tell you what 5 months, 6 months is going to do, right? Let alone if this lasts for a year or who knows how long until there's, one of two things, either what's been coined as like herd immunity, or there's a mass adopted vaccine. That's the only way that there's going to be any kind of sense of, quote unquote, normalcy the way it once was. But between kind of the onset till that point in time, I think that's just further ingraining these new habits from a consumer-oriented perspective, as well as businesses that, again, once had a particular way of conducting business and now have considered and tried alternatives, that they are delightfully surprised that it's faster, easier, and cheaper. And so, case in point, if I may, with voices.com, we've been thriving in this environment. A lot of our business and corporate clients can't go into recording studios. They used to collaborate very much in person or work in a big production facility, maybe in New York or LA. That was all shut down. Much of LA still on lockdown. Social distancing is proving a very challenging situation, because particularly in the traditional world of auditioning, okay, where you get everybody filed in one after another, that doesn't happen anymore. So what are these companies doing? They're Googling voice talent audition, how to hire a voice actor online, and they're going to land on voices.com. Now, we have looked at, we've won more new accounts. We also have had what we call win-backs. Maybe somebody tried us a couple of years ago and now they've re-engaged. And so we're seeing this. And so I actually wanted to personally validate if this was a permanent shift in behavior. So I've conducted over 100 calls, video calls, conference calls with customers to just investigate if this is the case. Then it's telling me that the industry has shifted, and this is a long-term, permanent, favorable tailwind, and it's in our, it's favorable to us. And so, that question led to, well, is there something more that we can do for you? Is there something missing that you are kind of used to in the, the old world that you want in an online environment? So I've tried to use that as an opportunity to learn. But yeah, I think that's just one, case in point, the groceries, the, delivery of, you name it. I just don't see that going away. And I think that is part to explain, collectively why we're seeing, the stock market, which is represented overweight by large tech companies, at a disconnect from kind of day-to-day, Main Street businesses that
and the
are
real economy
really struggling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What's interesting is that, as you were talking about this, a lot of sort of flashbacks on our end, and it's one of those things where technology is one thing. These technologies have existed for 5 years, even 6 years, 7. But user adoption is a completely different thing, right? User behavior tends to be slower than the innovation. And often, you have, if I were to quote Nassim Taleb, like, black swan events that propel that. So one of the interesting things is also, at least for our companies and tech companies in general, is working from remote, right? Before, everyone had an office, and now we were just forced to do that. And people are realizing, you know what? This isn't as bad as everybody, thinks it is. In fact, it's very productive. Once in a while we can still meet face to face, but this is awesome, right? So flexible. And then before you realize it, this becomes a new normal, and up we go. And it's always important to be on the right side of history, and technology is often on that right side. So.
It's funny, before, we have 45,000 square feet at Voices, more than 100 employees. Everybody was always on site. We didn't have a single remote worker. Wow. And almost to the point, like, we only hired and recruited on the condition that they were either in London, Canada, or you were going to relocate to London. There's a lot of benefits to that, clearly, but now we've actually, fast forward after having gone through the experience, I think we've, dare I say, handled it actually quite well through communications and carrying as much as we can a lot of the routines, daily stand-ups, weekly huddles, quarterly rallies and town halls. Yeah. We just do it all now on Google Meet, and that's been tremendously effective. And when we've ran the employee surveys that are both kind of, anonymous, and people want to leave the comments with their name, they can. There's absolutely a group that is, to use the term, thriving in this environment, where they are getting a lot more done. They feel more productive, more energized. There's also a group that really liked the face-to-face, right? So when it came to redeploying, let's call it a policy, we actually opted for a work from anywhere. And what that means is 1 day in the office per week, where we can have those bigger team meetings and just those kind of more collaborative sessions. We've got a staggered schedule where different groups would be in the office. But that's 1 day a week. If you want to come in every day, go for it. If you want to come in just once a week, that's fine too. But we felt like, that was a good approach. And as a founder, I think we just need to be, and I'll kind of put the call out to all of you as well, be open-minded that you should be considering that you don't need to be all in the same spot. And as a byproduct, what I'm excited for is the possibility of actually recruiting, hiring, and onboarding employees from different parts of the country, possibly different parts of the world, just get access to expertise that we just didn't have before because we unnecessarily put a geographic constraint on our recruiting. So, I think if you can consider what the possibilities are, it's going to be, it'll be even stronger for the tech companies that choose to take a really progressive stance on this particular issue.
So, I mean, interesting times indeed. That's the best way to sum this up. And so usually, these times of great sort of upheaval or retransformation also, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty and doubt and fear, but they can also be these, amazing, pieces of opportunities, right? Where especially the younger generation can benefit from. So I do want to ask you, for a lot of folks, maybe in their 20s and 30s, as they're thinking about, doing their own thing or taking the leap, but nothing is for sure, success is not certain. What would your advice be, based on your personal experience, and how would you enable them to navigate through this?
Well, the phrase that comes to mind is, what is the story that you want to tell? What is that life story that you want to tell? Do you want to tell the story where you were unsure, you had a good idea, but you never really pursued it? Or do you want to tell the story of, I had an idea, I took a chance, and it worked? And even if it didn't work, I took a chance, and now I know. And so I think, we can ask ourselves, well, what's the story I want to tell? So I want to tell the story about how I had an idea, I solved a real problem with customers. So then it kind of becomes the challenge of, well, which of the many ideas to pursue? And I think it's said that, startups don't starve for lack of ideas. They drown because of too many ideas to pursue at the same time. Right. So pick one, and one that you're passionate about. So our conversation is going full circle. One that you're passionate about. Is there a thread that's weaved through your life that is pointing you maybe in a direction? It's kind of stitching all of these life experiences together that you can go, oh, I can see how my life's been leading to this moment, and how if I pursue it, it's still on the same time continuum. It's kind of, you're just extrapolating out. So I think that we want, pick one, and then I would actually encourage you to stick with it for long enough to see if it really either comes to fruition or not. Sometimes ideas are just thrown away too quickly, and you just bounce from idea to idea. Pursue it, make a time commitment. I'm going to give this a go for 2 years or 3 years. It takes a while. But I think that level of commitment and intentionality will go so much further than virtually anything else. It's, entrepreneurship is very much a mental game. I know you know this, but it's having the mental fortitude to face adversity, to overcome objections, and to have the conviction that what you're doing matters. And ultimately, when, at all of those moments in life, just ask yourself, what is the story I want to tell about this situation? And I'll be confident you're going to make the right decision.
Awesome. Wow. I thought that was so inspirational. So I'm curious, what kept you going can you talk about some of your darkest of hours and maybe share some stories around that? And so what happened and what kept you going, man? Like, when you say persevere, it's easier said than done. I've been through it too, that struggle. And it's terrible, right? Nothing goes right. So what kept you going?
Well, I would say first and foremost, that I'm a co-founder with my wife. So I think we definitely provide each other with support. So I think having a great co-founder, not that it's, I don't want to make this about, that you should start a business with your spouse or other half, because that has its own challenges. But in our situation, it's all we've known, and it's really worked. It's really worked for us. Up to this point. And, now we're, Stephanie's less involved in the day-to-day and more on a board and still retains a lot of the ownership, her portion of the ownership of the company. But all that said, for a long time, it was all we talked about and worked through a lot of the challenges. And some of those challenges actually involved, maybe our customers not quite understanding our intention, or maybe having a different perspective of what we should or shouldn't do. These are challenges in going back to this idea of these two-sided marketplaces, that one side wants it fast, easy, and cheap, and the other side wants to take time and do a great job, and it's maybe an art or a craft, and it's their personal livelihood. So having to navigate these, you're trying to make the best decisions. And when, if we've gotten it wrong, or maybe we've made a decision too hastily, people say things online that they would never say to you in person, and that can be hurtful over a long lasting period. And, that I think has been probably the hardest for us, to learn how to receive feedback, because I think that's an important attribute of an entrepreneur. You want to hear and listen from your customers, employees, other advisors, but when it kind of veers into the edge of being hurtful and harmful, then you got to know when to let that kind of thing go as well. And I think we're far from, and me personally, far from kind of nailing that. Especially when it's your own company that you started, it's you put you're literally your entire livelihood and your career and your life is pursuing a particular dream. And for us, and it's been very simple, of inspiring the world through the power of the human voice. How can we use the human voice to inform and entertain and inspire audiences? And so we think there's something special there. And so that, I think, is a very kind of pure and noble pursuit. And sometimes that's kind of, maybe misinterpreted, or, doesn't sound, that there might be a difference of beliefs or alignment to that. In which case, that's where there tends to be the conflict. But if you have a conviction in your own vision and you want to pursue it, I think that you can overcome any adversity. And that's really one of the most important qualities of an entrepreneur, is this kind of abstract concept of the ability to overcome those situations. And there'll be no shortage of them just because you had them in the past. You'll definitely need to have a degree of persistency and perseverance.
Could not have said it better. But David, thank you so much for your time. I know you have a hard stop, but we really appreciate you taking the time out and sharing your insights. And we definitely look forward to having you in again.
Well, I've enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully, if you've been watching or listening, that this has been helpful to you. And reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Always there. Love to see and learn what other people are working on, what they're starting up, and encourage you just to pursue it. Continue to pursue that dream.
And if anyone wants to get voiceovers and recording, you know where to go, voices.com.
Awesome.
I will probably be reaching out to you because you were looking for some videos and voiceovers. So, hey, there you go. Perfect. Thanks again, David.
Thanks so much.